So, my name is McGuinty. I'm the Director of Policy at the Ontario Chamber of Commerce. And because I was asked earlier, and I now do this at all my presentations, I'm related to Liam Hemsworth. The similarity is astounding, I'm told. Dalton McGuinty is my father, and I told him I was doing this tonight. And he said, tell him the elevator story, because it happened near me. I was like, I don't want to tell him the elevator story, but just do it. Okay, so he was at Yonge and Eglinton, he was in an elevator. And an elderly woman came in the elevator, and she looked at him and said, my God, has anyone ever told you you look just like Dalton McGuinty? And he said, yeah, I get that all the time. And she said, oh, you must hate that. So he wanted me to share that story, I don't know why. So the Ontario Chamber of Commerce, we represent 60,000 businesses from across the province, every sector, every region, every business size. Of our 60,000 members, 2 are members of the sharing economy, and you can guess who they are. So it's not an intuitive move for the OCC to be talking about the sharing economy in positive terms, because the key term that's used in my world is disruption. It's not sharing, it's disruption, right? But there's a reason for it, why we want to be part of this conversation. Number one, it's an industry that's worth $15 billion today. In 10 years, that's going to be $300 billion. So the question we're asking our members is, what share of the sharing economy does Ontario want to capture in terms of new startup technologies and new jobs? So we put out a report in August talking about what government should do to regulate the sharing economy. I don't think regulate, by the way, is a bad word. You see Uber and Airbnb and other companies talking about the need for smart and effective regulation. I don't think we should be afraid of using that term. I don't think you stifle innovation. I don't think you stifle economic activity with smart regulations. So before we did the report, we said we need some factual evidence for why this is an important subject. So we did some polling, and I think the polling was really revealing. About 70% of Ontarians think that the sharing economy is a good thing for Ontario. That number only grows when you look at the 18 to 35 demographic. And also when you look at that 18 to 35 demographic, this was a number that shocked me, 40% are users of sharing economy services. And for the most part, that's Airbnb and Uber. And as that population, as that demographic ages, you can expect exponential economic growth. And you can also expect changes in perception in terms of how people expect their governments to approach the sharing economy. So Noah really captured the regulatory challenge quite well, and I think actually captured the political challenges quite well. One of the political solutions that you mentioned is being proposed is Tim Hudak's private members bill. And I'm going to say something weird for McGuinty. I'm going to say really nice things about Tim Hudak. That's a really bold and ambitious bill, and you don't see that many types of regulatory proposals from provincial politicians, and I think he should be applauded for that. It's got specific provisions, as actually mentioned, on ride sharing, home sharing, and parking sharing. And the point that he's trying to make, I think, is, look, a lot of these activities operate outside of the legal realm right now. People have clearly spoken. They are in favor of the sharing economy. So let's bring government up to speed. So I applaud him for his bill, and I think the point that we tried to make with our report when we put it out was Ontario and Canada and Toronto need to be leaders in the sharing economy. Now when I look 3 months later, I think that's funny that we said that, because I think we've largely missed our opportunity to be global leaders in the sharing economy. Cities across Europe and the United States, they've already implemented home sharing and ride sharing regulations. I think Ontario and Toronto have a chance to be Canadian leaders in that context, but we need to get moving. And I think, I did poli-sci as my background, I work for an MP. I think we have such a small C conservative political culture here, where we're so risk averse, and Noah talked about the political pitfalls where we completely devalue innovation and we completely criticize, or some in the media will criticize government failures, not you actually. That there's a risk aversion out there that you don't necessarily see in the United States. It translates both from the private sector and to the public sector here. But what we need and what the recommendations were in our report were for smart, regulatory, adaptable innovations. So one of the pieces Noah didn't talk about, but I think is sort of the elephant in the room with the sharing economy, is insurance. Right? UberX, that seems to be part of the conversation all the time. If I take an UberX ride and there's an accident, Am I covered if I'm the driver, if I'm the passenger? If I'm an Airbnb guest and I fall and I slam my head on a glass table, and the Airbnb host has personal coverage, not commercial coverage, is he covered? There's a lot of gray areas right now, and I think we shouldn't undervalue the role that the private sector can play in filling some of those gaps. So you've seen UberX has $1 million policies. $1 million policy, 5 million, I think, $5 million policy. And Airbnb has just implemented a liability insurance program that's now come to Canada, I think, 3 weeks ago. You've also seen Uber partner with Intact to provide an UberX specific program or coverage that's not yet implemented that covers UberX drivers as commercial and personal based on what they're doing at that specific time. The point that we made at the Chamber, getting back to why we approached this in the first place, because there was a lot of trepidation among our members as to why we want to get involved in the subject, is why can't we use this as an opportunity to reduce the regulatory burden that's already on what we call existing operators. I'm going to use an example that Noah didn't use. I'm glad you didn't use it because I'm stealing from his report. If you're a hotel operator in Ontario, you are subject to 33 different pieces of legislation. One of those pieces of legislation is the Innkeepers Act. I think it was written in the 1800s. A quarter of the text of the Innkeepers Act deals with what an innkeeper can do to a client's horse if they don't pay the bill. That's on the books in Ontario today, right? It's a symbolic example, but I think it's telling of the level of regulation that our members tell us they are subjected to. So why do we need to bring, for example, an Airbnb up to this level of regulation when somewhere in the middle seems to be a much more appropriate threshold? And Ashley mentioned what's going on in Quebec right now with home sharing regulations. She also mentioned an example in Niagara. So the concern in Niagara, it's a very strong tourist community, and if there's a hotel tax there, Airbnb comes in and suddenly people are using Airbnb instead of hotels and your tax integrity is threatened. Well, why don't we regulate? Why don't we do what governments around the world have been doing with Airbnb, which is saying, Airbnb, you're going to collect and remit this tax on our behalf. Why not do that? It seems completely intuitive, and if you talk to Airbnb, they'll say, yeah, let's do that. Let's go, we'll do it. We've done it in countless cities, why can't we do it here? But again, it comes down to this, I don't know what it is about Canada, but we are very reluctant to change. I don't want to completely blame the Canadian ethos, but I think there's lots of reasons. One of them is, the advent of the sharing economy, I think, has been a little bit delayed here. Think about the conversations a year ago versus today. I think the amount of coverage that Uber and Airbnb get today especially is remarkable versus a year ago. I think the final point that I want to make is the contractual work point, and I think it's a very, very interesting long-term consideration for the sharing economy. So it's the growth of contract temporary work is astounding. By 2050 in the United States, somewhere between 40 and 50% of workers will be independent, freelancers, contract, whatever you want to call it. Think about the implications of that from a social safety net point of view, right? So if I'm a contract worker, I'm an independent worker, I'm detached from all the benefits of the social safety net, employment insurance, pension coverage, workplace pension if I've got it, et cetera, et cetera. So if we're moving towards a place where we've got an abundance of contractual workers, what are the implications for the health system? What are the implications for our pension system? Now, I'm not suggesting that the sharing economy is responsible for creating contractual work, but a lot of the criticisms and what you'll hear in committee in a couple of weeks, or whenever Tim Hudak's bill goes to committee, is criticisms about the sharing economy creating these types of jobs. So that's something we need to think about. My reaction to that is, if you think about something like Airbnb, are they creating those types of jobs, or are they supplementing income for largely middle-class people by allowing? I'll use the example of my friend Dylan. He now rents out his apartment 2 weekends a month. Him and his wife have gone back to both of their PhDs. They have a kid on the way. There's no way they could have stayed in Toronto. They're going to move back to Richmond Hill with their parents, but because they rented out 2 weekends a month, they're able to stay in their house. That's not creating a new kind of second-class job. That's creating a supplemental income that they're able to use to stay in their current lifestyle. But I do think that contractual work is going to be the focus of a lot of debate in the coming months in Ontario, so it's something that I think people should keep their eye on. So at the OCC, we're going to be, part of our challenge is bringing our members on board with this, and as I mentioned, 99.9% of them are not sharing economy operators, and a lot of them see the disruption that's happening. So I think what needs to happen in the Canadian context to help overcome some of those difficulties and start looking at the economic benefits is we need some Canadian data in terms of the real impact that Uber and Airbnb are having on things like income, on contractual employment, on our insurance system. And before we have that data, we can't really have this conversation in the Canadian context. The United States is way ahead of us. Many European countries are way ahead of us in terms of the data, and data tends to lead to regulation, so we really need to get that piece right before we move on to the next stage. Thanks very much.